Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Weather Center Nazario. Thank you for taking some time out of your day and joining me this Tuesday afternoon. It is November 14th, 2023. We're going to skip a lot of the formalities once again because I do have a lot of incidental details to cover with you guys, but I also want to say a big thank you for tuning in because I've seen quite a bit of misinformation circulating the weather sphere this afternoon and over the last couple days for that matter, and I'm going to do my very best, especially in this video here, to try to de-escalate some things that I've been seeing floating around the YouTubes, the social medias, and etc. for that matter. If you could be so kind, please like and share this video, subscribe to my channel if you're new here, and if you haven't done so already, there's going to be quite a bit of information coming out not only over the next couple days concerning everything we're going to discuss today, but also some new innovative details that I'm going to have releasing and some new video coverage for the channel to help kind of revolutionize exactly what the winter and the springtime for next year looks like to keep things a little lively and more alive on this channel as tropical season fully dwindles. So we're taking a look at our water vapor imagery to encompass the greater Atlantic Ocean as well as the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico because we have two main areas of influence that we're watching. This blob of energy over the Gulf of Mexico that is expected to spin up into a low-level circulation, as well as this area of energy down here. This was initially highlighted by National Hurricane Center earlier this morning as what could possibly develop and push off to the northeast. That has since boomeranged back down to the southernmost Caribbean, and I do believe all this moisture down here that we're seeing ballooning up just off the Yucatan Peninsula, Central America coastline is actually going to be gravitated to the north in way of this system pushing towards the west coast of Florida, impacting the Gulf Coast states right now. I have good news for those of you tuning in from the Caribbean. To tell you the truth, guys, over the last 24 hours, starting at 0Z yesterday, a lot of our models have once again really backed off in terms of seeing our development probabilities out there for the Southern Caribbean, with a lot of our models to include even the GFS, who was very doomsday-like in its early depictions of the situation down there, really backing off in terms of any sort of tropical development. We are still anticipating some very, very heavy rainfall, and we'll get into those specifics towards the back end of this video, but I do want to start off with a bit of good news that despite what some others may be saying in terms of a hurricane or a tropical storm, those favorability chances are starting to diminish despite what National Hurricane Center has out there. We're going to continue to monitor just in case, but we are starting to see some very pleasant and positive trends on a lot of our model data today. All right, so first things first, we're going to look at a general overview of our AOR down there. We're going to look at the Gulf and the Caribbean simultaneously using our 12Z European model. On the left-hand side, we have mean sea level pressure precip, and then on the right-hand side, we have our 10-meter winds down at the surface level. Right away, as soon as you go 24 hours into the future, look at that very closed center of circulation just to the south of Mississippi, Alabama, both indicated on our mean sea level pressure chart and in the 10-meter winds. This has been very interesting to watch unfold over the last couple hours. I've been looking at all sorts of different model data I don't typically fixate on, and I'll show you here on the next panel that there's been some very, very bizarre up-and-comings this morning and into this afternoon with all of our 12Z updates. I shared a little bit on my community posts on my YouTube channel if you want to take a look at that, but I'm definitely leaning towards we may have something along the lines of a subtropical storm style event unfolding for the Gulf Coast and eventually the east coast of Florida for that matter. As you continue moving along, you can see that system is expected to die off as a lot of the energy both in the Caribbean and along the southern periphery of the Florida Peninsula begins to deepen down and turn into our next potential significant low pressure system, dumping lots of rain for the south and southeastern portions of Florida, over the Bahamas especially, increasing some good wave action out there as it does so as well, before exiting off to the east and northeast with the jet stream aloft, kind of unfolding into what looks like several embedded vortices underneath the jet stream for that matter. You can see three low stamps all at once in a very elongated wind field with this as we get into Saturday and Sunday of this weekend. Now, if you're looking down in the Caribbean and you see what I see, notice that the Euro has once again completely backed off on anything trying to get going. On the right-hand side chart, if you look on Friday afternoon, or I should say Friday morning, you can see that there is a low-level spin, but nothing significant coming from it. We are still looking at quite a bit of rainfall on that right front side of it. I know this won't be an organized tropical cyclone, but it is still postured to have the heaviest thunderstorm activity and rainfall on its right front or its right front leading edge for that matter. So So Jamaica and especially Haiti, Dominican Republic, we're watching closely to see just how much inundation we could see from the rainfall we're anticipating. Now we're going to look at a few different model parameters we don't typically use on this channel, but I wanted to share with you guys just to kind of get exactly where I'm thinking and what it is I'm paying close attention to. I'm not going completely just off of this model data. I'm looking at several other computer models for that matter. I wish I could show you all in this video, but we'd be here for another hour or two trying to digesting that together. So I'm going to show you two specifically. We have on the left-hand side our 3-kilometer NAM, one of our more high-res models, and on the right-hand side we actually have our high-res NSSL model that I'm looking at for the Gulf of Mexico and the east coast of Florida. And as you track both of these high-res models through time, notice how as we get into Wednesday, particularly into Thursday, look at how they're both forecasting that low-level system could very well consolidate and turn into something either subtropical or almost full-fledged tropical, with the NAM on the side here, the left-hand side, going all the way up as far as 50, 60 knot winds in that center of circulation. The NSSL is kind of thinking the same thing, albeit weaker, and if you notice, if you look very close at these bands of yellow winds right in through here, how they kind of pinwheel around the center, the NSSL model is definitely on board that we could get a subtropical cyclone out of this, whereas the NAM, astonishingly, guys, is thinking we could get a bona fide tropical storm out of this. Do I think one or the other is more favorable? I could see a subtropical system developing off of our coastline, and the probabilities do suggest it, albeit very low. I don't think we're going to see a tropical cyclone just because of the amount of wind shear we have aloft. At first, I wanted to explore the possibility of seeing something consolidate, but at the moment I looked at the wind shear and our relative humidity out there, despite the thunderstorm activity we're seeing, it really just doesn't support a full-fledged, or I should say a bona fide tropical storm, let alone a hurricane that some of our other models have been depicting. I've seen some other models go as far as to say we could have a 70, 80 knot cyclone off the Gulf Coast, and that's just a little too outlandish for me. All right, we have our NDFD model on the left, and we have our 12Z HRRR on the right, where the reason we're going back in time with the HRRR, the HRRR, is because our 0, 6, 12, and 18 cardinal model hours will go out about 48 hours as opposed to our other model platforms, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. They're intermittent model runs, so they only go out about 18 to 20 hours, if I'm not mistaken. So we're going to look a little further into the future using our HRRR and our NDFD models. We're looking at our total precip accumulation, and honestly, especially for the Gulf Coast in the southeast portion of the Florida Peninsula, we're definitely looking at some very heavy rain anticipated by both of our models. You can see we're in very good agreement that we could see anywhere between 2.5 inches along the Gulf Coast, especially as you get into Alabama and the Florida Panhandle closer to the Pensacola and eventually the Panama City Tyndall Air Force Base location, coming in at about 2.5 inches, where the HRRR is also on the same page with some very, very localized instances of 3, maybe 4 inches, whether it be on the shoreline itself or just off the coast, depending on how aggressive of thunderstorm activity we see develop over the next 24, 36 hours. If you look down over the southeast, right over the Miami-Dade, Fort Lauderdale area, you can see that both our models, and this translates over to the Euro and other high-res model for that matter, then 3-kilometer NAM is thinking the same thing. We could be looking at a precipitation event between 4 to 6 inches in inland areas of southeast Florida. So we definitely want to pay close attention to those vigorous thunderstorms that start to wrap up around what is expected to form off of our southeast coastline and kind of transcend the Gulf Stream waters before moving out into the greater western Atlantic. Which leads me perfectly into the next portion of this segment. We're going to look at our projected radar, and on the right-hand side, we have what's called our maximum updraft helicity. And guys, before I lose you using those very sciencey terms, all we're looking at is the potential to see some rotation or some really good tilt in the updrafts associated with these thunderstorms as they come through. If you harken back to mid-October during the first and second week, we were projecting a severe thunderstorm event for Florida to include a lot of tornadic activity. So naturally, because of the setup we have here, similar in shape, size, and structure, I wanted to examine whether or not we could see the tornado potential, and thankfully, it's not going to be nearly as high, but we cannot rule out the possibility of seeing maybe a stray funnel or a potential isolated waterspout along one of our coastlines as these storms work through. We're once again using the HRRR, and as you go through time, you can see a lot of those thunderstorms staying off the coast, albeit very strong. And if you look on the right-hand side, you could see closer to that system's center of circulation, whatever it may be, consolidated or not, we have really good amounts of updraft helicity indicated there. So that means our storms are spinning to an extent. And as you go towards the middle and latter half parts of the loop, you can see some of those helicities try to wander into the Panhandle, coming in close to the Panama City area. And then if you look down over the south and southeastern portions of Florida, as that system begins to develop, and we see some more cyclonic rotation over the Miami and just south of the Palm Beach area at the very tail end of our loop, Notice how a lot of the helicity values go up for our Bahama Islands out there, so don't be surprised if you're watching out there in the Bahamas if you see a water spout or two as these very ferocious thunderstorms begin to work their way in and rotate around you guys towards the Florida coastline, as well as the potential for a stray water spout or maybe just an isolated funnel cloud or two on the coastlines of Palm Beach and Miami. So we're watching closely down there. This may not be a classified scenario that we're looking at here. NHC doesn't have anything highlighted currently, and at this point I think we're a little too late to jump on the ball with highlighting something, but it goes without saying that with everything I'm looking at, from the winds, whether it be sustained or gusts, to the thunderstorm activity, to the rotation we're seeing in the broad scale with the entire storm system itself, both of them for that matter, and even the isolated instances of thunderstorm activity rotating around them, we could be looking at a very, very similar setup to what we would see with a tropical system coming in or a subtropical system. So it's not classified, it's not official from any official source out there, but looking at the parameters and comparing and contrasting them both, this is very reminiscent of a tropical storm kind of situation. And then last but not least, to cover all of our bases, we're looking at the wave height and maximum potential swath out there off the Gulf Coast and off the east coast of Florida. You can see as that system in the Gulf continues to deepen before headed due south away from the coastline, we are expecting some pretty good wave heights off the coast with a small area there that could get as high as 30 feet off the shores of Louisiana and Mississippi. This could help in a little bit of the coastal flooding that National Weather Service has put a couple of advisories out as well, and some marine advisories I've seen popping up on their websites. And then as you go even further in time, as that next system forms up off of our coastline, take a look at how sporty the wave heights start to get just off the Space coastline of Melbourne, Cocoa Beach, with some very, very isolated pockets, a couple miles offshore, we'll say hypothetically, getting up there between 36 and 40 feet. So on the coastline, you definitely want to be aware. I don't think anyone's going to be out there trying to surf, let alone go fishing or swimming because of the thunderstorms with this. But regardless, guys, we're going to have very dangerous rip currents. We're going to have very high swells. I'm thinking we could probably see anywhere between 6 to 10 foot waves right up along the beach. It's going to contribute to some pretty solid beach erosion that we've seen previously with other storms like Nicole last year, and even Tropical Storm Ian once he finally worked his way fully across the Florida peninsula. Beach erosion is going to be an issue. So as I mentioned on the page previous to this, even though this isn't highlighted, it's not classified, we're not characterizing it specifically with any of our official sources, we're seeing a lot of the same kind of scenarios play out, or a lot of the same phenomena we'd see if we did have a named system hitting us regardless. All right, before this video goes on too long, we're going back down to the Caribbean. Let's take a look at what we're expecting. So we're starting off with our GFS because the GFS and the European model are very much in line now this afternoon. They've been doing very good in terms of run-to-run consistency and model-to-model consistency when compared over the last several runs we've seen, especially when the European model and the GFS were night and day, with the GFS going major hurricane and the Euro barely spinning anything up at all. We're now in pretty good agreement, so we're going to look at both here. As you take the GFS through time, you see a little bit of development in cyclogenesis with very, very isolated pockets of very heavy rainfall. It does seem like the models think that the very eastern tip of Jamaica is going to see the most accumulation. However, I think depending on how much this wiggles and wobbles and how broad of a circulation it could be, we'll probably see some of those higher values trickle into the rest of the island. So don't think you're going to miss it altogether because of this stark contrast on our model data specifically. There's a lot of bleed over that typically happens with these types of charts. As you slowly continue through the loop, the GFS is thinking we could see a bit more of an east-northeast wandering with that precip field, and as such, the whole island of Hispaniola, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic could definitely see some very torrential rains, with Haiti still under the gun for upwards of a foot of rainfall before this whole event is over with. And if you continue to move through the loop, you can see Dominican Republic is not out of the woods yet, with some very, very isolated instances of coming up to about a foot, with about the max expected average being between 4 to 6, maybe squeaking into that 7-inch threshold. So it goes without saying we're not going to see a whole lot of really significant tropical impacts, but the rain threat and the flood threat is there, and I can't emphasize that enough. That's predominantly what we're looking at across the board when I look at all of our different models: the Icon, the GFS, the Euro, the Canadian, the KMA, the UK, every one of them. It's mainly going to be a heavy rain and a flood threat, guys, so we still want to try to stay ahead of it as best as we can. You come over to the European 12Z and you can see the same exact thing. We are still seeing a bit of a very stark contrast west over Jamaica with our higher values coming in along the east coast and the eastern periphery of the island, I do suspect we're going to see some bleed over. You know, weather does not act like this where there's sharp boundaries. I've seen some sharp boundaries in actual phenomena, but I do not think that we're going to see 6 inches on one side and then within a couple miles we're going to get an inch or two. There's definitely going to be a little bit of washing over and some blurring the lines in comparison to what the charts are saying. East side is definitely going to see more of it depending on where it tracks and how much rainfall it does take on. The west side might see a little less, but at the same time, guys, we're still going to be looking at a heavy precip event regardless. You continue through time, and again, you can see that the Dominican Republic is expecting a lot less rainfall based on the euro, but you can see Haiti is still definitely going to be our #1 flood-prone area as this system continues to transition up and out of the Caribbean. Still thinking we're going to work in between the islands here, right along the channel going to the east of Jamaica, in between Haiti and Cuba, and then up into the Bahamas before it can finally rain itself out to where the euro thinks it's going to be sheared apart and kind of pulled into that system developing off our east coast here in Florida. So lots of wiggle room in terms of where this rain is going to go, but again, guys, I've seen a lot of sources mentioning tropical storm, potential November hurricane, and as we go into the next couple of charts, I want you to take a sigh of relief. There is going to be some very heavy rainfall, and we're going to get you through it, I promise. We have official sources out there who are tracking this. I am not official, but you can guarantee I'm going to try to continue to provide you with the most accurate information, no hype, no scare tactics here, and we're going to get you through this safe and sound. We just got to make sure we're paying close attention to what continues to unfold. So we're now looking at the European wind model. This is the same model, however, using weather nerds because we can actually zoom in on our islands and get a better feel for what's going to happen as opposed to looking at that broad scale we were looking at on the other website. So as you go through time, you can see we are expecting a low-level spin to begin to take shape, but as it continues to the northeast, notice we don't really have a whole lot of wind activity with it. There's a very isolated instance trying to get up to about 35 knots, which would have been moderate criteria for us in Air Force weather. Nothing to be too overly concerned about. We could maybe see some tropical storm level gusts out of this situation, but even as you go past that point in the loop, notice how the wind field begins to really die off before it gets absorbed off the northern portion of the chart here with that system developing off the Florida coastline. So all in all, guys, it's really just going to be a very prevalent rainmaker, and that's the #1 thing we want to prioritize when it comes to our prep work down there. You can see the same thing on our GFS model. The GFS was #1 to go extremely off the chain in terms of depicting a Category 4 hurricane, and even the GFS has finally kicked into its senses and is being very realistic with this situation. If you look up across the coastline of Florida, however, you could see a really strong wind event unfolding with that system expected to form up over the southeastern coastline, moving through the Bahamas. So we could see tropical storm-like conditions up there even as that next system begins to deepen over the next 24, 48 hours. But then if you look back down over the Caribbean, guys, as that system tries to get organized, it should remain fairly broad. This has been the overall agreement that I've had looking at this. I know I've mentioned tropical depression, maybe tropical storm, but from day one, I was a little leery in terms of how tough or how organized this could get because we have El Nino really in full effect for much of the South and the Caribbean for that matter. So you continue through the loop, and at most, the GFS is in line with the euro. I think we could see 30, 35 knots out of this before it washes out completely and moves off to the east-northeast. For my viewers down there in Puerto Rico, my aunt and a few of my friends down there alike, don't be concerned with this 1,008 millibar low you're seeing here. It's not going to be a whole lot of influence. You might see some good rainfall from it, but as you saw in our precip charts, a lot of the major flood concern is going to remain for the island of Hispaniola, maybe parts of Cuba and Jamaica. We're going to wrap up the video looking at our Canadian model because the Canadian model is still kind of hinting at what we've highlighted over this past weekend and late last week. As you take this through time, we are anticipating a little bit of weak cyclogenesis out there, but notice how the system moves slow enough to lose that influence off the southeast coastline, the system that is expected to kind of magnetize it and pull it out of the Caribbean and then either wash it out or kind of become attached to it into a very long appendage-like or tendril kind of system off the east coast of the U.S. It loses that influence and sort of wanders about down there, moves off to the west, deepens down, but then if you look at this very dark shading of pink, violet, and purple colors here, that's our next strong frontal system just in time for Thanksgiving here in the U.S. that's expected to collide head-on with it and wash it out altogether. So all in all, guys, we have a lot of positive trends we've been witnessing over here, and I do think that the hurricane season is going to close out with a little bit of a sigh and a whimper. We won't see anything too catastrophic outside of the flood areas that we were highlighting in Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Jamaica. So all in all, we can all take a deep breath and get ready to turn the calendar out of the hurricane season 2023 with a bit of a positive outlook as opposed to a negative. I know this was a very long-winded video, guys, so we're just going to go ahead and close out real quick. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for taking the time that you do to view my videos, and I hope you you've all been doing well this point into the month. We've already gotten through about half of November, and we're 9 days away from Thanksgiving, and I can't believe it. Thank you for all your continued support. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for all the wonderful comments that I've seen all across my videos and all the different segments I've put out both on Instagram and here on YouTube. You guys truly are amazing, and it continues to inspire me to make these videos, and I'm so excited to see what the future has in store for all of us. We'll see you again soon. Until next time, this is Weather Center Nazario, signing out.